My name's Steve Grumbine. I am the founder and CEO of both Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and C4 respectively, as Jamarl Thomas will often say. I am also, and I have an MBA, Master of Business Administration. I have a Master of Science in Technology Management. I have a Bachelor's in Information Systems Management and a bunch of certifications and so forth, which put me great in the IT space. So technically speaking, I don't have any expertise in this category at all, other than the fact that this is what I devote 100 hours a week of my life to, is learning about this movement and trying to understand how to make these things come to be through the lens of modern monetary theory. And so what I want to do right now is just take a step back for a second and talk to you all about something that was raised by the previous, in particular, Kay, about the race to the bottom. So the states, all of our states, are what we call currency users. Every one of the states receive money from the federal government. They don't create money of their own. So all of them are dependent on the federal government to do its job. And so what happens is that the federal government and our entire worldview is that of what we call neoliberalism. And no, that is not shorthand for corporate Democrat. That is an entire ideological position that goes across Republicans, Democrats, and it's around the world right now. You see it with the IMF, you see it with the WTO, you see it with the World Bank, you see it around the world. Whenever the global South is taken into consideration, we see the global South raped and pillaged for its real resources. So a lot of what's going on in the Medicare for All discussions has to go with that understanding that we are living in a world of mass privatization, a world where the politicians, the corporate interests are all focused on the idea that the market, the free hand, the free will of the market, the invisible hand of the market, going back to Adam Smith, this whole concept is about markets and the ability for corporations to maximize profit and maximize shareholder value. And so when you look at our states, many of the states, when you look at their fiscal position, they are hurting. The vast majority of states in this country do not have their pension plans fully funded. States like Kansas, for example, were so bad, they had deprived the public purse so much of tax revenue that they were using school books that were falling apart. They couldn't open schools. Kids were not able to have any of the basic services they need. And so what states like Texas do, Texas puts a big old sign up and says, hey, we're ready for business. All you corporations, come on down here to Texas. We'll take the tax away from you. We'll take good care of you. And so there is this race to the bottom where the states are literally competing with each other. So what happens when you have a state that is, I don't know, they have a major employer pick up and move and leave, say, Detroit, Michigan, and go down to Dallas, Texas. You leave a hole behind, a donut hole behind, where people are literally left without any kind of funding. And so the state revenues, the local revenues dry up. The schools dry up. The roadways can't be fixed. All of the aspects of the local economy are in jeopardy. Okay, this is why when you look at when there's a national disaster, we have a FEMA or a federal emergency, right? Federal, right? Because the federal government is the creator of the US dollar. And people don't realize this because you've been propagandized to believe that it's the Rothschilds or it's some weird nefarious thing with private banks funding the federal government, which isn't how it is at all. And the panel after us will talk about funding, how this stuff gets funded. But I want to talk specifically about the dynamics that make this funding really super important. If you have a healthcare scare, like, I don't know, a pandemic, and you have that go throughout all the states, first of all, let's just say hypothetically you were able to get states like New York and California to be able to provide this. They have unique economies that are very, very large, larger than some of the countries around the world. And so based on their ability to bring money into the state, they may be able to survive some of these ebbs and flows. But the vast majority of the states are underwater. The vast majority of them have huge deficits, and they start horse trading. They start trying to find new ways to fund things. In the state of Pennsylvania alone, there was a $600 million shortfall, budget shortfall a few years back before the pandemic. Their answer to supplying that shortfall was to cut services, number one. And number two was to begin to allow fracking companies in the middle of a climate crisis to begin fracking throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Because it is a purple state, you have a lot of differing opinions about how that tax revenue should be spent, because at the state level, it's all about taxes. States are heavily dependent on tax structures. And so what ends up happening? Those local states fight with each other. The counties fight with each other, etc., for revenues. People, though, have a different perspective. What do the people with money do? They want to live in a low tax area. So you have what they call flight. And when people move out of those areas, you're left with a tax hole, a hole in revenue. It's really, really dangerous and damaging to all the other social fabric of that community, not just Medicare, but everything from pensions to roadways. Think about our bridges and infrastructure in this country. Many of them are D-rated and below. So as you begin to think about why the race to the bottom is so important, begin to realize all the things that the state is responsible for. Unfunded mandates from the federal government are huge. There is massive, massive, massive unfunded mandates that are pushed down to the states. So what do they have to do? They either have to raise taxes, or they end up not in compliance. And then the federal government has, penalties, and they don't provide the services that they were going to provide. There's different acts like Act 89 and stuff like that in Pennsylvania. Use Pennsylvania as a perfect example, where monies from the federal government are provided for roadway infrastructure, but they are encumbered, meaning they are specific. They have to be targeted to do a specific thing. Well, that doesn't mean they can use that as a general fund. So all the other services of the state end up drying up. They've got to find things. So what happens? Look at places like Ferguson, where they use fines, fees, and penalties on the poorest Americans to fund their police, to fund their social services, to fund their schools. They have cops at every corner waiting to get people with speeding tickets, trying to fund their local and state initiatives. This kind of behavior, this kind of model is the absolute opposite of what we want our country to be like. This is not how we want things to go. And so you bake in inequality right off the bat, because every single state ends up being in that position. Now, there are a few states out there, obviously, that have taken on the role of being the let's just slash and burn all the taxes and bring business down there. They have the employment. The people that are doing really well do really well, and the people that are doing really bad do really, really bad. Now, why does that matter? There's 26 states in the United States that have ballot initiatives right now, 26. So of the 50 states, 26 of them could even put a state-by-state approach up on their, to vote for, right? But you start getting into situations of how do we have what we call a scalability, or the ability to provide care at scale, to be able to make sure everyone has care. And they can't do it. It's fundamentally impossible for them to do it, because one of the most important things is not just the money. It's how do you resource this initiative? How do you make sure you have enough doctors, right, for the increased load? How do you make sure you have enough nurses, gurneys, x-ray techs, phlebotomists? How do you make sure you have enough clinics and care facilities around to support this new influx, right? And so now you've got to account for not just the payments of the premiums, but you've got to account for creating the actual real resources to provide the care. Now, a state that doesn't have the planning mechanism to bring in the care for all that is also setting everyone else up to fail, because they're pinning their hopes on one state getting it and it becoming this watershed event where everybody suddenly becomes enamored with it and suddenly everybody has Medicare for All. It doesn't work that way, and it will never work that way, okay? Only the federal government has the ability to do this. But one of the most important things, and this is one of the dangers I heard, and I've just pushed general pushback of the last speaker, Anna, is that when you think about Social Security. Social Security, FDR made a deal with the devil to tell everyone that Social Security was funded by your FICA dollars, right? That you're investing in your FICA. Well, this is a lie. It didn't happen. That's not the way it happened, but he had to do it for political reasons. But here we are now in the year 2022 with still previously people like Paul Ryan coming out there in Congress talking to Alan Greenspan. Wouldn't it make Social Security more viable if we had private accounts and we were privatize it through like 401k plans, stuff like that? And thank God for a moment of actual honesty from King neoliberal Alan Greenspan himself, where he said, no, it wouldn't make it more. The key here is, can we create an economy where the real resources are for sale for purchase? Okay, so what FDR did by making this FICA thing happen, created the most regressive tax possible to fund a service that should be just a benefit of living in this country, an investment in our elderly, and provide the COLAs that are required. Because the one thing the federal government absolutely can never run out of is US dollars, because it creates US dollars out of thin air. Okay, now I'm going to take you on another journey here real quick, and this one is an important one that many people may not understand. The CBO, we always talk about the CBO scoring and things like that. One of these key metrics is GDP. And when you think about GDP, it's gross domestic product. It's basically the balance sheet, all the money that the country made. Doesn't matter how it made it, just whatever economic activity creates that GDP. And so this indiscriminate number called GDP is held up as God. But what happens when you make Medicare for all for all? Once you make Medicare for all, you eliminate all those insurance companies. You eliminate all the extra nonsense that has been put in place to deny care as opposed to provide care. And so all that economic activity, all that meshuggah right there is washed away. And that nonsense right there is part of GDP. And once that GDP is eliminated, you end up with recessionary conditions. Now, all of a sudden, you end up with a situation where instead of raising taxes, you need to cut taxes. Counterintuitive, I know, for all the folks out there, and there are many who believe that taxes erroneously fund spending. But taxes literally are deleted. So if you're taking money in for taxes to pay for things, well, number one, you're lying to America. You're lying to every citizen in the country. That's a lie. We don't want to do that. We don't want to start off baking a policy to provide health care founded on a lie, because there's nothing worse than a lie, because it comes back to bite you like FDR's lie did with Social Security. So we want to eliminate these concepts of trust funds. We want to eliminate these concepts of pay-fors, because the fact is that if the government isn't covering all of it, then it's left to somebody else to believe they're covering it, which means that it's not really a right. Now it's dependent on a tax dollar. And that should never be the way it is, because affordability is the one thing we've got to eradicate from our mind. We got to stop thinking of how we're going to pay for it. That needs to be eliminated from all conversations, because we need to understand how the currency is spent into the economy. Okay? So when you think about the state-by-state approach, you already know that with more than half of the states really struggling to fund even their pension programs, how in the world could they take on the burden? And it would be a huge, unnecessary burden at the state level. They would have to slash and burn. They would have to raise taxes. They would create situations where the big taxers, the people that are actually funding their local governments, would say, no mas. They'd pick up and leave. This is called white flight. We see it all over the place. This has happened and left communities of color destitute, as the inequality baked into that model is so severe, so harsh, so absolutely exacting, that if you don't understand this, you might be inclined to advance a model that would create that very condition. And I'm here as my role in this thing to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that you understand that taxation literally is deleted. So in the bathtub of our economy, okay, we have a spigot coming in, that's federal money spending into the economy. And over here, we have another spigot, and that is private debt pouring into the tub. Right now, private debt is rising through the roof. We can see it in our federal student loans. We can see it in all these things, all this nonsense. It's a burden to regular people. But down at the bottom of the drain is where the taxes come out. Private saving, we call that leakages. And so those leakages are not funding anything. Do you understand? They're not funding anything. The only tax dollars that fund something are your local and your state taxes. Federal taxes are literally deleted. Social Security, FICA dollars are literally deleted. The FICA score, that little sheet you get in the mail that says how much you paid all over your life, that's a numeraire. It's merely an accounting identity to say, yeah, you paid. But those dollars are deleted. There's no fat stacks rolled up at the Federal Reserve with Granny's old wooden nickels or Buffalo, none of that stuff. There's no hay pennies in there from yesteryear when they were saving up. It's all gone. It's all new money every time the government spends. But states can't do that. States have to raise taxes to pay for things. And what happens when people start moving to different states and all of a sudden they leave the poor really, really destitute? This is a problem that has implications way beyond Medicare for All. This is a problem with a Green New Deal. This is a problem with college for all the different things that we crave as progressives. And so when you see media on television sitting there lying about taxpayer money, or when you see alt media pretend like these aren't issues that should be talked about in every single live stream, not just some, not just when the MMT is on, but every single one, that they're abdicating their role in this movement by not talking about it every single time. Okay? When they don't do that, they are setting the stage for more misery. And they got blood on their hands. So this is where we've got to get smarter. We've got to really begin to recognize that the parameters of Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, while it was built for capital, it was built to protect capital, this one area, Article 1, Section 8, gives the power of the purse explicitly to Congress. Now, we can go one step further. We know that lobbyists have control of our government right now. We know that our government is largely captured by special interests. So this is where the state-by-state crowd gets their oxygen, because there's valid case there to be made. This is why it is important that we understand the economics, we understand what's at stake, and we organize at a national level to take this thing down. And we have to be ready to sacrifice. We cannot just be, well, it's a little inconvenient, don't really feel like doing that, it's a little, I don't know. We've got to really understand that we are in a war, and it's a global war, because while we're fighting to get single-payer healthcare in the United States, our U.S. government is busy exporting neoliberalism to the UK, who already has a national health service that they're now trying to privatize. In Australia, they have a healthcare service as well that the United States is there to say, we're here from the US and we're here to help you privatize your stuff. And the World Bank and the IMF are doing it around the globe. So while we're trying to fight this battle here, they're fighting it the other way to dismantle what they have outside. So you must understand this war is not just a single issue war. It's a bigger war. And so this is where the MMT angle comes in. And if you see an MMT post, you start hearing people talking about this, make sure your ears perk up. This is for you. You need to know this, because as a warrior to make this stuff happen, if you're not prepared with the tools of the trade, if you don't understand what's at stake, you're likely to make a really bad mistake. And you'll watch as the California folks ignored the MMT message. You watch as the Washington State folks ignored this message. You watch as the New York folks ignored this message. They clung in groups that self-fulfilled, yes, state by state is the right answer. And then they found other people that were opportunists to make them feel like it was the right answer. But the truth is, there is no wiggle room. There is absolutely no wiggle room. The race to the bottom isn't just happening in the US, it's a global thing. And we must be aware of this battle. We must embrace this paradigm so that we can fight back. And that, my friends, is why I'm telling you right here, right now, the only way forward is a national-based approach. But you must understand the powers that be are fighting you for far more than just Medicare for All. They're fighting you for the very belief system that there should be no public property. There should only be private property. And this is the battle. This is your class-based struggle. This is the entire shooting match right here, my friends. And so I hope that you'll take the time to learn this stuff, because these wonderful women that were on the panel with me have brilliant ideas of how this needs to be done. That ain't my specialty. But I'm here to tell you that this global scourge of neoliberalism is going to make it a challenge that you didn't even anticipate until you see the broader inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques of that entire mindset. Once you embrace that and you stop skipping it so you can be friends with everybody, once you take a tough edge and you realize how important this battle is, you probably lose a few friends in the process. I'm not going to lie. But it's worth it, because we're going to gain a lot more, because this is the battle. This is the battle. You've got to embrace it to move forward. So, Joy, that's what I got here.